WOZ Up with Bill. Conversations on life, faith, and everything in between.
Well, good day and welcome to another edition of WOZ Up with Bill. Welcome to my podcast. We're glad to have you with us, and it's always appreciated the feedback that we have received from the podcast. Our heart is to try to be an encouragement to you on the various topics, so we hope that will happen again. Now, to contextualize things, I was able to have as my guests the last couple of podcasts my good wife, and I only have one, Cindy, and we talked about in two parts on building things we've learned to building a long-term, healthy marriage relationship, which is certainly legitimate. But as I talked with some others on my pastoral team, we felt that what we needed to do to bring some balance to that is to talk about the other side of that coin is the whole issue of singleness. That I'm thankful for the opportunity to have enjoyed almost 53 years with Cindy. There are people who may not necessarily be married, and their walk in singleness is legitimate as well. And we're aware that the Apostle Paul, he had a lot to say in regard to marriage and the marriage relationship in his letters. At the same time, he also spoke very openly about singleness, and singleness can be, in fact, an asset to people as they walk out their faith as well. Because, when you take on the responsibility of marriage, you have a wife and then eventually family, and you need to be responsible for that. But when you're single, you're much, much lighter on your feet. I was just saying to somebody not long ago that before I was married and was single, I could pack everything that I had in a car and be ready to move in 2 hours. Now, that's not going to happen now in my house and all that kind of thing. So we want to talk about singleness, and then more specifically, how that's contextualized in the context of the church. And we need to really be fair about that. And so I'm really, really happy today to welcome as my guest today my daughter Rachel, who is going to talk with her old dad about singleness and really the whole issue of learning how to wait. And I've asked Rachel to just kind of share her journey about as a single young lady in the church, some of the issues and some of the pressures. And I think we can learn a lot from Rachel, so Rachel, welcome. I'm glad that you're willing to join me and to help me with this today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you, Rachel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask some questions and get you to share the things that kind of you've learned. I know that when I was in the hospital overcoming my health issues, we spent a lot of times talking, and you shared with me that one of the things you might like to do sometime, and I encourage you to do that, is talking about maybe writing a book on the importance of learning to wait in the context of singleness. And Rachel, the point is you walked it because you were single. Well, I don't want to tell you I want to tell people how old you are because I don't want you to smack me. So, but you waited a long time. So what I'd like to do is start, Rachel, just talk about some of the issues and some of the issues as a single young lady in the church, some of the issues, the pressures that you faced, and your perspective on that and what we can learn from that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not shy about my age. She'll tell you that I'm currently 48, and I didn't get married until last year when I was 47. So I put in my time, and you were my pastor until what? When did you retire?
2015.
Yeah. So my whole life, pretty much. And I never felt any pressure from you and Mom to get married. But I will say in church as a whole, there does seem to be this sort of like undercurrent of expectation for young women to settle down and get married and have babies, whether or not you have a career outside the home. And so for me, I always felt like I was so different, or maybe there was something wrong with me, or that I was broken somehow, because that never happened for me. And I had my share of crushes over the years, but, you taught me in my formative teenage years to learn the principle of attention without intention, which really, I think, laid the groundwork for me, because I didn't walk around, looking at whatever guy happened to walk in the building to analyze whether or not he was marriage material. It was just building friendships with people and being open to experiences. And I think that really stood the test of time. One thing that always stuck with me is that my journey really never looked like so many other girls in the church. And it still makes me emotional to think about it because of all the time. I use the word wasted, but I don't think it's wasted time, because it taught me a lot about who I am and how strong I am. But, wishing and praying and hoping for someone to love. And I remember you asking me one time if you would like if I would like for you and Mom to pray with me and for me for someone to come into my life, to spend my life with. And I said, of course. And then you laughed and said, well, it's better to pray for you than against you. So it's important to have a really good system of support around you. Make lots of friends, have an active social life. And the most important thing, I think, is to actually live your life. Build a life that you are proud of, right? Whether that's putting roots down somewhere, starting a career that you love, volunteering, doing stuff that enriches your existence, right? And it's not a matter of distracting yourself, but rather enriching yourself, I think. Because truly, when people say it's when you're not looking for it, that's when it happens. And I know that everybody's heard that before, but that is really the truth of it. So I think the best thing you can do for yourself is improve yourself, right? Like all that time I wished for somebody, and I have a journal before me that spans back probably 30 years. I started it when I was a teenager, in your footsteps, kind of writing down like my thoughts and ideas about love and romance and marriage, and going back and seeing how that's changed from a very fairy tale version of it to like the very real world, effects of love and what it means in like day-to-day life and what real love really is. And there's a little bit of everything in there. There's, my favorite love songs and my favorite scripture verses that I have trusted God about leading me to Scott. Lots of, there's like a couple tacky poems I wrote when I was young. And then really there's just a daily log of, I was really excited today. Like I felt a palpable sense of anticipation about you. Really, it's a love letter to Scott that about how I loved him before I met him, and how ultimately I ended up sort of laying that hope of finding somebody down, knowing that whether or not Scott came into my life, or someone special came into my life, that my relationship with God and my family and my friends would be enough.
Rachel, there are a couple things I'd like to ask you and get your perspective on. You touched on the whole thing in the church, sometimes the pressure. I know some time ago I was speaking with I'm going to call her a young lady who as yet has not been married. Mm-hmm. And I remember we were chatting about that, and I was referencing your experience. And, I know that it's kind of a double thing, because you're my daughter and, Dad and I was pastor, but it didn't necessarily mean that it's all the more easy to sort of navigate. But I remember saying to you, Rachel, that, as much as the reason I asked you about should we pray, and that I wasn't trying to be funny, because I came to the place where I needed to understand as a dad and as a pastor that there could be situations where people may be called to live in singleness and serve the Lord in that context. And that's not something to joke about. Because if that's what it was, then I wanted to respect that. At the same time, if you wanted to be married, then we would simply agree with you, not say who you should marry, but that we would pray with you. So that's important. But can you touch on a couple things, maybe in the context of the broader the church, that we might be aware of, and leaders, of what we can do, whether it's a young man or a young woman and they're single, like what are the practical things we can do to be supportive, and without bringing undue pressure?
For sure. I think, first of all, it's important to note that unless you were engaged or married, you are being called to singleness, right? I don't think it's something that happens to you or that it's a mistake. I think that there are ways that single people can minister or be involved in missions or ways they can participate in church that married people or married people with children cannot. And I think that's highly overlooked. I think that if you are single in the church, sometimes we have the ability to be kind of like not swept under the rug per se, but maybe just generally not acknowledged. So, I mean, get involved. That's the best thing you can do. Don't just sit in the pew and stew because, nobody called you to hang out this week. Call somebody and hang out with them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, lead a ministry or drive a Sunday school bus of kids somewhere, volunteer and get involved. And, because life will happen to you if you don't live your life, right?
Yeah. The other question I have, Rachel, is in the whole thing we've talked about this different times about, we chuckle and we smile and we have a few jokes about it, but, we talk about expectations, right? That, that young men can have expectations of what they're looking for. Right. And in our family, we laughed about it because I've told you that I had a list of 10 things that I was looking for in a wife. And we have a lot of fun with it. We laugh at it anyway. But then vice versa, expectations on the other side. And you shared some really interesting perspective about expectations of who might be the young man in your life. And then how that you talked about how you felt, you needed to work on yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it probably wasn't until my mid to late 30s that I had the epiphany. And I wish it's something that I could give to people so that you realize the depth of it. But really, loneliness is a very real thing, but you can be lonely with the wrong person, right? So it's not just finding someone, it's finding the right one. And it doesn't mean they have to be perfect, right? We laughed a little bit about, well, he needs to be handsome and he needs to have the big bank account and he needs to have a good singing voice so he can be a worship leader, right? So it's you also need to think about you, and not in a selfish way, but you need to be working on yourself. Like, I carried a lot of trauma my whole life from something that happened when I was very young and never dealt with that. And it has affected me my whole life, as you well know. And it wasn't until I started seeing a therapist that I realized how deeply that rooted and how much it affected my sense of self, how much shame I was carrying and so forth. And so I acknowledge that in my journal here at some point, that even if, say, Scott had come along much sooner, I would not have been ready for him. I would have burned that relationship to the ground and hurt both of us, right?
Yeah.
So if you are not in a state of like preparedness or readiness in your heart, then I just believe that it's God's timing, right? Because there may be things that you need to deal with or work on or learn about yourself before you can be ready for a relationship. Because there are concessions you need to make. You need to, you need to meet each other in the middle, basically, on a lot of stuff. So if you're a stubborn person, maybe you need to work on being humble, or just, pick a descriptive word in the dictionary and work on that. But yeah, it's important to be introspective when it comes to something as serious as being in a relationship or being married. And I'm not saying that because I think I'm the expert, but the truth is the truth, right? You need to be ready to be with someone for life.
So, Rachel, are there a couple things you talk about in the sort of walking out the singleness, being single? I don't know if singleness is a good term, but being single, that couple things that maybe sort of pop out to you that you could share that would encourage people who are, you're now, then we're delighted. We've welcomed Scott into our family and we're delighted for you. But in the context of, I love what you're saying, is that while you're waiting, stay engaged. Like a couple of things you would say to just encourage people,
Yeah, I think one of the most important things you can do while you're single, be intentional about being single. That's the biggest lesson I learned. Because, they say hindsight is 20/20, but I made a note in my journal here for today that looking back now, having met Scott and having been married, it'll be a year this November, that I can see clearly how God worked everything for my good to lead me to Scott. And I spent all those years, raking myself over the coals, wondering what was wrong with me, or, what am I not doing right? And just kind of withering away, if you will, you can scrap that part. But yeah, you can spend a lot of time focusing on the negative when you're single, thinking about what you could be doing differently or what's wrong with you. But you need to shift the focus off of you in some cases, and get engaged.
Yeah.
Like participate in church as much as you can, be as social as you can, and build your support system that's going to help you. Girls, foster really great relationships with your girlfriends. Same guys, foster great relationships with your guy friends. And there's some crossover there too, but I think it's really important not to muddy the waters. Yeah, participate in small groups, do Bible studies, start a journal, and start writing down your hopes and dreams for somebody that God has in store for you.
Rachel, I know that one of the things we said and we encourage you with is this, and I encourage anyone, and we do have some people at the church that I serve now as a pastor to seniors, but Pastor Paul lets me talk to young people, so that's why I keep staying on staff.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying to someone, it's not meant anything but in an encouraging way. And I've said to them, because I've pastored for over 50 years and I've observed things, okay? And we've often talked about, and they said, there are worse things than being single.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is being married to the wrong person because you just decided you would settle. Yeah. No, saying settle, it's not about thinking that you're better than anyone. But I appreciate that what you're saying, that, and I respect that in you, is that you just didn't sell yourself short. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, you made a really good point, Rachel, earlier about, and I know we've met people who are in a marriage relationship and they're lonely. So people assume that if you're single, you're going to be lonely.
Yeah.
But it's not the truth. If the relationship is fractious, you're still going to be lonely. So,
yeah.
So what would you say to people? We'll wrap up soon. To people who are single, what would you have to say to them to just encourage them?
Well, the Bible talks about being equally yoked, right? So it's important to wait for someone who maybe isn't the same as you, because Scott and I are very different, but we share the same values, the same faith. We're both really close with our family. So those core values are things that you want to hold out for. Yeah, I really wish that I could impress the importance of all this to people who are single, because I know how hard that loneliness is to handle. Sometimes it just seems like it's never going to happen for you. However, I will say maybe you need to be okay with that, because regardless of whether your singleness is for now or for life, we serve a big God and he has enough grace to sustain you.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Rachel. I really, really appreciate that. I know we will talk about this more, but thank you so much for coming and being willing to open your heart and share it, because sometimes these things are difficult. But at the same time, I really, really believe it's going to help some people. So that I just listen to what you're saying we could be a sort of buzz phrase, but you're talking about people need to embrace their singleness and enjoy life.
Exactly.
Because sometimes you're right. It happens in the context of serving, that kind of thing. And I know that you had in your heart, you had sort of basic things that were values that were non-negotiable, and the other things are, we can joke about whether or not he has lots of hair or no hair or whatever. We can laugh about that. But because those things are variables. But
yeah.
I just, we're excited to see how it's worked for you. And for those who are in that situation, and, I'm just saying that I'm praying that as we serve, on the staff of Faith City Church, and we have people in the church who are single, that we want to celebrate them.
Yeah.
and encourage them to know that they're not disqualified because of that.
I will say one add-on thing. If you are married and you have kids, don't forget about your single friends. And also, I may be a bit bitter about this, but if you are not celebrating your singles friends events, like birthdays and achievements and stuff like that, don't invite me to your wedding and your baby shower.
Well, there you go. There's a
Christian spirit for you.
Oh, well, that just lets us know that God's still working in you. And, of course, you can't claim perfection because you're my daughter. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah.
Rachel, I love you. Thank you so much for joining us. And for the folks who are joining us, thank you for joining us with this edition of What's Up with Bill. And we look forward to sharing with you again in the next edition. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.